Ladies and gentlemen, this is Dr. Robert Marx, a retired professor of the University of Miami School of Medicine. This is a YouTube presentation on climate change, the hoax of CO2. This will be a preamble to what you're going to view over approximately 10 different segments. This is based on Climate Change, a Hoax of CO2 Revealed, my latest book on how climate change really occurs and that CO2 has really nothing to do with climate change. The book will tell you that climate change is real. It's advancing slowly at the rate of 1 degree Fahrenheit per century, different from what your politicians are telling you, and that the sea level rise is not due to melting of glaciers. Now, that may be in confrontation with what you're hearing, but stick with this, and I think you will find some interesting data. Now, this is how you can order my book. I would please if you would. And then as we start this, I will show you that there is my uh, email address and my phone number, as well as the publisher. We're open for questions and challenges. So this is all really transparent, things that politicians talk about, but very rarely do. Al Gore also said that, well, the last ice age ended by CO2. No, take a look at what the last ice age was. There's been 5 major ice ages in our world's history. The last one began to wane about 25,000 years ago when the Neanderthals just became extinct and we as a species took over the apex predator on the earth. There was a 1.5 mile thick glacier from the North Pole to the Illinois-Wisconsin border and all the equal latitudes in Asia and in Europe. It was like this, that much ice. But that was 25,000 years ago. It peaked out 25,000 years ago. It ended 12,000 years ago. It took 13,000 years for that big glacier that was 1.5 miles thick to melt. And when it did, it took the oceans, which are 400 to 600 feet lower than they are today, and brought them up to our present level. That is true ocean rise. Ocean rise is going on today, but not due to glacier melt. Because take a look at Fred Flintstone. He wasn't using fossil fuels. So if you have pushback by the people who believe in climate change due to CO2, ask what really ended the last ice age? They have no answer. We know what the answer basically is. I will tell you in a moment. So what did end the last ice age? 2 things. What's called the Milankovitch Cycles and the closing of the Central American Panama Canal, the Atlantic to the Pacific. Okay, so what are these so-called Milankovitch cycles? This has been known since 1920. Nobody, no scientist disagrees with this. This is hard science. It's due to the orbital shape. Look to the left of your screen. The orbit of the Earth around the sun is never a complete circle. It is a slight ellipse to a major ellipse. That's the basic thing that causes ice ages and inter-ice age warming periods. Another component is that the Earth in the orbit, not the Earth itself, but the orbit tilts. And then there is wobble as our elliptical orbit goes through the universe and the Earth is rotating around the sun. It wobbles and it can wobble toward the sun or wobble away from the sun. Guess what? That changes Earth's temperatures, not in a day, not in a year, but in at least decades and mainly centuries. So what I want you to realize is that there's other things afoot other than CO2, and they are much more controlling. Now, here is one that I caught NASA in a big mistake. The minimal ellipse is 0.0034, if you could look at that, away from a complete circle. But the complete ellipse, the furthest away, is 0.58. In their website, they claim that's only 3 times an additional difference away from the sun. Actually, if you run these numbers, it's 17.1 times minimal baseline. Okay, so what does that mean? It explains what's called snowball Earth. About 600 million years ago, there was a glacier that encompassed almost the entire Earth. 90% of the Earth was covered in an ice age, whereas the last ice age we've had, and most every other one, has been 30%. So you always had warm areas in what is now Mexico and the Central America. So you can see some of the false pictures and the false assertions that are out there. This is the true science of the Milankovitch cycles, and it explains every ice age, including that worst one called Snowball Earth, when it was at its maximum elliptical, and that changes. And in between, there are times when it's not at the minimal ellipse from a circle, but in various stages to the maximum, showing you the great variation in the orbital configuration of the Earth around the sun, explaining decades long and centuries long differences in temperature. So keep in mind these so-called Milankovitch cycles agreed upon by everybody since Milankovitch developed it in 1920. Okay, so what is actually causing global warming? The elliptical orbit of the Earth around the sun, the orbital tilt of the orbit itself, not the Earth itself, but the orbital wobble. And then one other thing, the closing off of the Panama Canal. This was open in the area now of Honduras and Panama by a wide streak during the last ice age. About 60,000 years ago, it closed off due to tectonic plate movement and volcanic action. So guess what? All that warm water in the warm Caribbean basin now flows up to Greenland, Iceland, and the Arctic ice pack. It took 13,000 years for it to melt most of the ice pack to what we have today. And it created what is called the Gulf Stream in the Atlantic. I personally live in Florida and I fish in the Gulf Stream. It's a 3 to 5 mile an hour trail of 90-degree water going up to Greenland, Iceland, and the Arctic ice pack. And this is why you have tropical fish off Bermuda, which is much further north than they ought to be. Now, I'm going to show you this slide several times, but going back to 5,000 years ago, if you look at the baseline temperature of 1950, you can see from roughly 4,500 years ago, most of them were warm periods. You can see the oscillations. And then we had a cold dip just before the Roman warming period. Now, in the Roman warming period, roughly the time of Christ, from roughly about 400 BC to 200 AD, we had a warming period. It was actually warmer then than it is today. And that's why the Roman Empire, the Greeks, and even the Egyptian prospered. They could produce more crops. They had less loss due to different cold snaps and other things. And then during the so-called Dark Ages, there was a cold period. It was colder than it was in 1950 back then. Then, roughly about 1400 AD, there was a medieval warming period. And that medieval warming period was warm enough to melt the glaciers in the fjords of Norway and Sweden. So guess what? Our Viking colleagues were able to navigate them, get out of that north, and basically raid England, develop Newfoundland and other things. This is stuff that is known. I'm not making this up for you. Then if you look a little further, look at the dark blue. That is called the Little Ice Age, roughly around 1400 AD to 1850. There was an extreme cold period, and that was probably due to the sun and to the Milankovitch cycles. Now, if you look just a little bit to the right of that, you will see another red bump up. That's what we're going through now. The coldest period on Earth, the Little Ice Age that we're familiar with, ended in 1850. And since then, our globe has been warming. Please keep that in mind because a lot of things will come to understand after this. So what is contributing to global warming if it's not CO2 and the so-called greenhouse effect? To solar output variations. We can measure the amount of light hitting and the energy hitting the Earth in 1850 compared to today. If you run the numbers, there is 867 trillion more watts of solar energy per year hitting the Earth since 1850. Solar output variations. What do I mean by that? Our sun is a star. Every star pulsates. It goes hot, it goes dim, warmer, hotter, things such as that.